Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining our Spitfire Q&A discussion inspired by really a strong response from last week's webinar, Governing Capital Delivery in a Post-Project Online World. For anybody who might have joined in and is new to Broadpin, we bring together top Oracle experts to deliver deep project-focused solutions for customers on a wide variety of industries. And some of you may remember us as project partners, Quistor, Primatis, and Pitts. I'm Kristen Kirkendall. I'm your host today. I'm the Director of Marketing at Broadpin North America, and I'm excited to bring back Garrett Hartley, the Director of Product Marketing at Oracle Construction and Engineering, to join us in continuing this conversation. So last week we received a lot more questions than we could answer live. So we thought, why not? Let's dive in live and keep the conversation going. So without further ado, let's dive in. So the first question that came in my mind, honestly, was what concerns or themes that most stood out from last week. So actually, Garrett sent me a quick little presentation, so I'm going to share my screen. Excuse the admin here, but we are going to go through here. So Garrett, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, thanks, and great to be back. So great topic. I think one of the more important themes that came out of last week, at least the one that was top of mind for me, was folks still have questions on, kind of what really is OPC. And I just want to give a 3-second explanation on sort of what it is, what it isn't. So first off, it's not P6. And it really boils down to kind of three magic things, or three main things. The magic of what I call one unified plan. And I'll explain more about what that is. It's really designed for handling all projects, meaning small projects and large projects, and all users, meaning beginners to experts. And lastly, that it's more than just planning and scheduling. So our legacy brand of what we've always known Primavera for, has been planning and scheduling kind of at our core. And we've had lots of legacy products, whether that was P3 or P6, those sorts of evolutions out there. A lot of people know us, for that. But, for anyone that is considering moving from MSP into, something else, I think that it's important to just understand that high level right out of the gate. Not P6, completely engineered SaaS cloud solution, a very different animal than what we've done in P6, but with a lot of benefits of what you just see here. So let me just walk through a couple of quick concepts, and then I think we want to dive right into the remaining parts of these questions. So what do I mean by the magic of one unified plan? What OPC does is it takes the outline of a contract schedule, which is essentially the same DNA algorithm that we've always had in developing a contract schedule, and then you hand that contract lanes of the road off to a certain point in time to a field team. Field teams tend to think about short interval production. And you can think of this kind of align more with like what the Lean Construction Institute's pull planning and last planner methodologies are. So we structurally tie those two things together in one system. And if you run the animation here, what you'll see is that while you have an activity contract schedule on one side, you have a field schedule on the other side. These two things can be and often are developed in different systems. And the issue with that, or the problem with that, is suddenly we're not sharing the data between the office and the field anymore. And our thesis is that you really should be sharing the information between the office and the field. So if you're developing a contract schedule, you're developing a field schedule, if different teams are doing those things, ultimately you need to think about structurally combining them. And I think a lot of folks that are out there that are playing a two solution sort of scenario, essentially think about solving their issue by an integration or some sort of way that we import and export something. To me, that's always a risky endeavor. We don't require you to import and export anything. You can literally build a field schedule and a contract schedule in the same system and then tie them together. So it's a completely different way of thinking about the community of people that are involved in planning and scheduling, and getting that community, more tightly tied together. So a massive change from anything that we ever used to do, inside P6. So that concept's really important. And then I think a lot of industries go through what I would say is looking at the project work that they do, and it might be a mix. We might have made a solution set that was targeted at handling something like large, big, complex projects and something else that handles small, simple projects. And the truth is that a lot of organizations are a scatter plot of a mix of those things. A certain percentage of the work is small, a certain percentage of the work is big. You also have user communities, a certain percentage of people that are on the beginning in their planning and scheduling journey, and some that are a little further out on their expert side. What we're really trying to capture and what we've done in engineering Oracle Primavera Cloud is getting our hands around all of that. So it's great at doing the small, simple work, just as good as it's handling the large, complex work. And that's a surprise to a lot of people that I think, have historically looked at the Primavera brand as doing the large, complicated thing, but maybe not as perfectly well suited for someone that's on the beginning part of their journey in planning and scheduling or handling smaller, simple projects. But that's been an exciting aha. So all that stuff could be wrapped up in one container. And then the fact that it's more than just scheduling. So I think everyone remembers us as knowing how to do this. We're great at contract, CPM, master planning, and scheduling, but what they may not know is that we also do all these other things. So all the resource and cost management, all the portfolio management and capital planning, all the task management, all the resource management, all that stuff is in one container. So it's a lot more value in one cart, and you don't have to have all these additional procurement components. All that stuff comes with, is already baked inside to OPC. So with that out of the way, I think this is great for us to sort of jump into other differences or other questions that came out that I know we're going to get a chance to dive into. So thanks for that.
Sure thing. And thank you. So one of the questions that came through last week was for organizations really still wanting to act. What are the risks or pressures that they should be aware of as 2026 or the 2027, 2026 deadline approaches?
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that engineering and construction projects are fundamentally unique types of work. I think the thesis for a long time in a lot of MSPs or Microsoft's sort of strategy is to think of projects, irrespective of whatever you're making, as all the same, right? Like it's just a project. What's unique about it? You're always going to have a need for a schedule, a need for maybe adding a resource, a need for another, but all projects are like vanilla ice cream. And that's not what we do, and that's not what we build. So defining project management and all of the subsets of the capability areas around project management, like planning and scheduling, and treating it as a lateral or a horizontal function that happens across an organization, all the same way, irrespective of whatever you're making, in my view, just isn't really true. Engineering and construction projects are different. They have different processes. They have different needs and wants. There's a different community of people that engage with them. We have a lot more complexity in how organizations need to cross boundaries and have to share information across boundaries than a lot of other project types have. So I think the aha that we've seen with owners, regardless of what critical assets or infrastructure they're making, is that capital programs need specialized focus, specialized tools from their providers that understand the business problem of engineers and builders, and they bake that industry best practice right into the solutions themselves to help essentially execute all the work that they do every day. So we don't make vanilla ice cream. And then then the risk or the pressure that you were talking about arrives in how do you think about scaling that? And the operating model has some key requirements versus what we used to do. So an on-premise solution is just less desirable now versus a cloud-ready, native SaaS solution set. And it has to handle all of the engineering construction projects, regardless of their size and complexity. And it has to be approachable or accessible to beginners and experts alike. And lastly, I think it's got to include the specificity around an industry focus and the capabilities that those end users expect and demand.
Yeah, wow. So to follow up with that, you explained last week why replacing Project Online with another tracking tool can repeat some of the limitations. So can you give me an example, or give us an example really of what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So when we first talked about this, I'm glad you brought this up. I think I framed it as tracking activity is no longer enough. And that has everything to do with the difference between two words that I think often get lumped together. Scheduling, which is the tactical stuff that we do to connect office and field teams around shared data and information, and planning, which is the strategy for how that actually happens. So let's clarify some terms here in a practical example of how both planning and scheduling have evolved. So activities are things that live within the domain of the contract CPM master schedule. Activities outline the lanes of the road. Tasks are sub-activity details. You think of them in practical terms like sticky notes on a card wall, things that work within the lanes of the road, but the field teams use the plan and manage the essentials of short interval production with tasks. So when I said that tracking activities is no longer enough, what I'm really getting at is a paradigm shift that we've been able to see in planning and scheduling, where the means and methods of traditional activity CPM contract master scheduling are blended with the means and methods of tasks, which support the details of lean production. So both matter, and not just because the users are different, it's because the experiences, whether or not I'm starting to build a schedule using a Gantt chart, like a traditional Gantt chart, or whether or not I'm building a schedule using a digital, planning and execution board or card wall. And how do I get to a unified plan is different. So I need a strategy that structurally ties these two things together into one unified plan, and tactics that make accessing, updating, reporting on everything, seamless and automatic. Now that necessary structural combo without using multiple systems to get there is simply a game changer for capital program governance. And that is exactly what we've done with Oracle Primavera Cloud.
Right. And really, your responses are building into these questions just seamlessly. So the next question that was on top of mind that we chose from the list from last week was essentially, what is the simplest way to understand the difference between tracking work and governing capital delivery, and how does OPC really deliver that to them?
That's a great one. So I think the simplest explanation between just tracking stuff and trying to come up with a framework for how we govern stuff is essentially how we see accountability. And I put C into a little acronym for everybody. How do we set? How do we empower? How do we enforce? How do we set? How do we empower? How do we enforce? So how do we set things like WBS codes, activity codes, project codes, roles, resources, scope items, work packages? I mean, you can rattle off the list of structural things that we do to try and set standards. So then the question becomes, how do we empower users to plan? Whether that's portfolio, budget allocations, or it's, with a Gantt chart, or it's with a digital card wall, what kind of experience are we creating for users to empower them to not just tell us what they plan to do or what they have done, but make it easy, accessible, and in their pocket, right? Sort of purpose built for exactly who they are and what they need to get done. And then we have to have a way of enforcing the rules. So rules are things like, well, how do we set up baselines? How are we going to manage baselines? How do we manage our schedule health? How do we qualify our schedule health? How do we deal with things like variance tracking, plan percent complete, trend analysis, earned value, whatever the things are that you're using to be able to manage your performance? Those rules need to be defined and the same at a certain level for looking across a portfolio, or you need to have some configurability when you need those rules to be a little tighter or looser depending upon the requirements of your project. So then it's a matter of how do we scale all that stuff. And I think the thinking needs to be, when you're thinking about governance, are we talking about an enterprise container to start? Or is an enterprise container something that happens as an afterthought? And I think this is where a lot of organizations really struggle. We might be good at helping individual projects get what they want. And then at some point, someone walks in, taps me on the shoulder and says, this is great, but how do I do this for all my projects? And then suddenly we've got to figure out how to re-engineer, a project-based system into an enterprise-based system. We have never had the problem at least here at Oracle and at Primavera, of trying to approach that from specifically just a project-based solution set. We've always focused on an enterprise solution set first. I like to think of it kind of like Moneyball. If you've ever seen the movie, there's a great point in that whole thing where it says, at some point, we all get told that we can no longer play the children's game. At some point, someone walks in and says, I need to be able to see performance across every single project that we've got in our engineering construction portfolio, whether that's small or large. How do I make that happen? And thinking about the enterprise from the very beginning is a great way to go to be able to help all of that set, empower, and enforce take place.
Right. And I think that ties into a little bit of some of the topics we discussed last week on maturity levels. So what's one governance shift organizations can make right now without any major disruption that they have?
Ooh. Gosh, that's a good one, right? Because there's lots of what I would call chief complaints out there that organizations could focus on, whether or not that was just help me figure out how to do the right projects, or whether or not I want to focus on getting my field teams more engaged in planning and scheduling things like tasks, or it's just, how do I do resource management better? But if I had to pick one, and in that, less disruptive category that has the most bang, for the buck on the return, I think the easiest thing to improve that offers the biggest return on improving outcomes would be thinking about governance around risk. And I'll tell you why. So if I narrow that down even further, it would be getting to something like the risk register that a lot of folks, look to manage. And let me give you an example. So a lot of folks still manage a risk register in a lot of the steps associated with risk management in tools like Excel. I might be where I have my initial register. It could be where I deal with developing my mitigation and my response plans. It's just a giant, shared Excel sheet. But as soon as we're doing that, it's hard to be able to figure out, A, how to make it available to everybody, and then B, when we start thinking of ways to qualify and quantify what those risks mean to my schedule or my cost, I've now got to figure out some way to be able to connect it. And if it's not easily connectable, or that risk register isn't available to anyone, everyone on the project team, I think that's a great place to start. We actually have a way to take all of PMI's 6-step risk management framework. We've just baked it right into OPC. Like, it just comes with it. And the interesting thing that we've seen is exactly what you just described, that a lot of organizations used to think about risk as being purely the analytics of running something like a Monte Carlo analysis. And that's, for a very small group of people that understand why and how to do that. But there's a lot more value in being able to just get everyone into the central register. And if you can get everyone there so that if you see something, say something, put that in some spot, whether you decide to eventually go through the quantified step is optional, but at least you've got it all in the same house to do it. So I think the opportunity that's there is centralize things like that risk register, make it available to everybody on the project team. And then if you want to go through the more advanced steps of thinking through the analytics, great, it's right there and available to do. You can turn more on, but not required. And at least you get it out of something like Excel and you get it into a system you can actually use.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. So the topic of discussion that really sparked some interest, especially from the Broadpin customer side and also just publicly in general, was the announcement of the FedRAMP in process. So for organizations that are looking to move away from MSP, or even are, utilizing other Oracle solutions like Primavera P6 that are on-prem, how should organizations think about their options as they require or anticipate FedRAMP or authorization?
Yeah. So I know we hit on this last time, and it's worth talking about it again because it's a big deal. So it's, as you stated, we're currently have OPC in process for FedRAMP authorization. That'll still take some time to go through that full authorization process. But it's an important market signal because I think it does help agencies, irrespective of whether or not those are federal or state and local, get prepared on what they want their planning and scheduling, community to look like. And it's also a great chance to be able to think about, reviewing or updating the specification language that's associated with what owners might want. And that aperture sort of opens up what the options are. The good news is I think for agencies that still contractually require folks to submit information within, say like a P6 format, P6 isn't necessarily going through the FedRAMP authorization. OPC is going through the FedRAMP authorization, and understanding the difference between those two things is really important. That OPC is going to go through the full authorization component. We're targeting a DISA IL4, security posture. So highly sensitive projects. These are things that they're really important for organizations to understand that we're going to have a certain security posture, ways that we protect the data, and it's not just certain components of OPC that are going to get authorized. The whole thing is going to get authorized. So all the way from the capabilities around portfolio management and capital planning, all the way into your core planning and scheduling, all the resource management, all the task management, all the risk management, all of that stuff is going to go through the authorization. And it's great for not just owners, but for delivery teams to begin preparing. And we've already seen folks begin preparing for being ready for that. And their own transitions and their own companies to be able to, either essentially align their businesses with what that stamp, what types of work they want to chase, and ultimately, hopefully receive awards for that. The whole point is to try and be able to align, owners and delivery teams around the sort of same, data information. So it's a great signal. I think it's a really important, thing for people to prepare for. We have a great plan for how we can help folks prepare for it. But yeah, big deal. A very exciting announcement for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to quickly stop sharing my screen to check to see if we had any incoming questions from our participants here. And we do. So when transitioning off Project Online, what data is usually worth carrying forward and what tends to create noise?
Good one. It's a hard one to talk through on the, kind of depends. There's the core of the structural stuff that I think a lot of schedules already have within it. So, it's, do we bring over all the things? Would we bring over and would you expect all these things to come over? They're the same. Things like your resource definitions, your WBS definitions, ways that you define activities, coding structures, calendars, all of that kind of stuff. We already have an import routine to accept Microsoft files and have that land inside OPC to make it immediately workable. And we've always had that. So good news is that transition doesn't have to be difficult because we can already accept the formats. We know how to play well with it. And I think that's an advantage, especially for the folks that I know right now, there isn't even a whole lot of clarity, or you might need additional components to even make that transition between MSP and Microsoft Planner. So, being able to share information across our own systems or think about OPC as a larger enterprise container that can accept and play with multiple formats is, I think, a huge advantage. What's noise within that? I think it's just a great opportunity to sort of look at the health of the projects that you're planning on either transitioning or carrying forward and where you want to run those things. And, it's a great time to think about, sort of cleaning them up. Are there too many, calendars in play? Are there too many, unused codes in play? Are there too many? It's just, for those of us that have been longtime schedulers, we tend to be sort of A-type-ish anyway. But great time to think through just some of the standard definition things that are going to come across. But I think that is the harder part for most people to get to. A lot of folks that have made this transition with us have really been thinking about their work on purely a project by project basis. But the thing to think through is, what does this need to look like when you start putting it in an enterprise container? Because now that C acronym that I was mentioning before, like, what do you want to set? What do you want to empower and what do you want to enforce? those standard sets of definitions that should be shared across everybody now really matter. So great time to think about that stuff. Great time to think about, what should we want those standards to be? How do I want all those projects to effectively work together? How would I want to roll these things up on reporting? Sometimes it's easier to be able to look at the reporting structure and almost work backward into what you would want to configure to be able to get to what you need. So varies per customer, but I think it's a great opportunity to be able to think about what stuff really needs to come forward and still be managed, and what stuff could you think about getting rid of, because effectively it looks like a repeat, or it's a good time to be able to clean up the data sets as you transition them across.
Fair. Yes, I agree. So another question that came through is, what's one of the most common aha moments that owners experience when they move from this type of MSP tool over to governance driven tools?
Yeah, good question. So we've got a lot of them that have done it, and the majority of owners that we've worked with have typically had a mix of solutions. So they've had something that was there to handle small, simple work, and they might have had a different solution to handle large, complex work. On the larger, complex side, that governance model is generally tighter, kind of by default. But what's interesting, and we've seen this happen, a bunch of different times, the aha that folks get to is getting their hands around all of it. Namely, how can they drag the small, simple stuff into the same governance model as the large, complex stuff? Because now I can do that without having to have multiple systems to do it. So it's easier to set standards and templates, easier to centralize the data, easier to share info across organizational boundaries, easier to recognize and respond to changes, roll up all the reporting, regardless of the project size or the complexity. I think that's the magic of what we offer, and that has been the aha that we've seen across the board.
Awesome. So I think we have time for one more question, and I actually have a question for you personally, so I'm going to take this time to ask that question. So
Sure.
if an organization could do one thing to prepare before the retirement of Project Online, what would it be?
Oh, that's such a good one. So here's all. Let's just go right at it. I wouldn't be afraid to challenge your current processes. How do you evaluate and select the projects or programs that align to your corporate strategy and objectives? How do you build a unified plan that everyone trusts and believes in? How do you make it easy and accessible to anyone, regardless of who they are or where they are? How do we understand and respond to changes, whether those are schedule changes, resource changes, cost changes? How do we want to handle baselines? How do we want to handle scenario management? There's a whole bunch of processes that we run around planning and scheduling. And this is a great time to interrogate that thinking. So how do you get your arms around all of your engineering and construction project data? And I think starting with process before you think about tools is the right way to go. So tools should support the processes that you ultimately want, not the other way around. And I think that we've seen that. I think that is the mistake that a lot of folks make. They tend to focus on tools first, rather than really thinking about what process changes and outcomes they want first. But if you get the process parts right, then the tools should just flow directly into supporting those things. And that's the great part about what we do, is we bake in a lot of those best practice processes that engineering and construction companies need and want. But we have a lot of configurability in you being able to modify it to support the processes that you need to run without having, custom things get done. For us, it's just configuration. Like, well, great, here, what do you need? But start with a process discussion first. Challenge the processes that you're currently running today. I think there's a lot of opportunity out there to be able to do things differently. But yeah, start process first, then think tools.
Yeah, and that's something that we encourage our customers here at Broadpin to undergo an assessment and really dive into what was and where they want to head before actually implementing the tool, so that they have all of these things in place prior to implementing the thing that's going to enable them to get to where they want to go.
Completely agree. Yeah, completely agree.
So I am going to put something up here on the screen for you guys. It's how to get in contact with us. So as we conclude today, I just want to thank everybody for joining us. And as you think about life beyond project online, or even another tool that you're looking to phase away from, remember that you don't have to navigate the transition alone. So if you have any follow-up questions or want to continue the conversation with us around capital program governance, Oracle Primavera Cloud, or transition planning, you can reach us at any time. So you can find our contact information here on the slide. And thank you again for spending part of your morning, really coffee break for me, with us, and have a great rest of your day.